another question too. You mentioned earlier about in the areas of fiqh, the four imams, namely Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shaafi, and Imam Ahmed. So that the other question we may have is, what is the importance in following, one of them? Like, why should one have to follow one of them in their understanding in order to arrive at a proper Islam? Isn't it enough that today we have the whole Qur'an, collected, and also we have, books of Hadith that we can go to see what the Prophet ﷺ did? What would you say to someone who has this type of question?
It's a good question, and may Allah reward the host of this program, because it is essential that we make a means for the people to understand the Islamic sciences in their proper way. Here, the scholars of Islam, past and present, they understood in relation to the rules of the religion that there are going to be two types of people. They're going to be one person who is at an ability to read and understand from the primary sources of the Islamic law, meaning Al-Qur'an, As-Sunnah, Al-Ijma', the consensus, Al-Qiyas, the deductive analogy, and from those Islamic sources, which are the basis from which the rulings are extracted, that person who is at the level to understand that person they call Al-Mujtahid, which is that person who is qualified to do textual deduction. He's qualified to do that. That person they call Al-Mujtahid. Then the other person is that person who is not at that level, not able to read the primary sources and extract the rulings due to having deficiency either in knowledge or in the deeper understanding of the information. Because it's one thing to read something, and there is another thing to understand it. So that person who is not at that level of textual deduction, and they cannot extract those rulings on their own, that person called muqallid. That means that person must follow that one who has that ability. Now, when taking that into consideration, let's examine what are some of the conditions that that person who has that ability needs to know. For example, that person, let's say in just Quranic knowledge, we're going to take some of the sources. In Quranic knowledge, the knowledge of Al-Qur'an, that person, number one, he needs to know the Arabic language, because the Qur'an is in Arabic. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Al-Qur'an in the Arabic language. And the translation of the Qur'an is just that, a translation of the meanings of the Qur'an. But that translation is not the Qur'an. So first he's going to have to work within the Arabic language. Not only is the Qur'an in the Arabic language, it is in the highest levels of the Arabic language. It is not something that people may think that any Arab who speaks Arabic language will understand Al-Qur'an. And just from experience, you will notice that the person who is not a learned person, even though they speak Arabic, will struggle with understanding Al-Qur'an, even reading it in Arabic language with vowels, and will still struggle. Here, so that person who, first of all, we would disqualify anyone who does not know the Arabic language. And there is no way you're going to extract rulings because you can't even read the text. Now, that's just for the basis. Then they're going to need, because now you're going to talk about fiqh rulings, they're going to apply judgments. They're going to need to know all the verses in Al-Qur'an that relate to rulings. They relate to ahkam, which verses in the Quran we're going to use for judgments. They need to know all of those verses. And they need to distinguish, in addition to that, which verses of the Quran are nasikh and which are mansukh. Which verses are coming to abrogate other verses and which verses are abrogated. So they don't apply rulings to cases which were abrogated by other verses. And they're going to have to know what verses are general in their meaning or specific. Which verses come in a general meaning, but they are referring to a specific incident. Or which are specific that can mean general. They're going to have all this type of knowledge. They're going to know asbabul nuzul, when verses were revealed and why. Because maybe that knowledge of when the verses were revealed and why they were revealed is going to determine how those verses are applied in relation to rulings. This is just in brief, and there are many other sciences in the Quran. I'm just giving the brief aspect of it. Let's move to as-sunnah. In as-sunnah, that person's going to have to know the different categories of hadith. He's going to have to distinguish between the authentic hadith, or the good sound hadith, or the weak hadith, or the fabricated hadith. He's going to have to distinguish when a hadith is related to the Prophet, when a hadith is related to the companions, when it's related to the followers, when the hadith has a broken chain, what type of broken chain. They're going to have to need to know all this knowledge, because it's going to determine which hadith are used for rulings. If we go to al-ijma', they're going to have to know the consensus of those top qualified level scholars, the mujtahid scholars, before them, whenever there was a complete agreement on a ruling, so they don't come and contradict that ruling, which is to break the consensus of the Muslim nation. And al-qiyas, they're going to have to know the various ways to apply rulings to cases that were not existing, that are now existing now. And they're going to have to know the ways to determine if this ruling is applicable to this situation. This is just in 4 of those sciences that person is going to have to know. Now the question will become, how many people in our time have reached that level? They said if you want to know just in hadith knowledge to extract rulings, because that's what the person says, I'm going to read hadith and Qur'an and hadith, and I'm going to read it and I'll make my own judgment. They say that the one who needs to do that, in hadith knowledge, he should know at least 300,000 hadith with its chain back to the Prophet. That one who we said is mujtahid, he needs to have at least that much knowledge. I would challenge that the ones who make that claim, their best scholars don't know 100 hadith with its chains of narration.
MashaAllah.